We're going to give folks just a few more minutes to get in, and while we do that, I'm Robert Jones. Will Leslie and I co-lead the Lehigh Valley AWS user group. We've been running about 5 years, and we have meetings on every first Wednesday of every even numbered month. Our next meeting is a little untypical because Philadelphia is now privileged to have the Reinforce conference in June 10, 11, 12. And Will's been working very hard with Keith's group. Keith represents the Greater Philadelphia AWS Users Group. So our two groups are within hour and a half, depending on traffic. And so we're going to have a joint get together, meet and greet, happy hour on the 11th during the Reinforce conference. All the details will be put on Meetup. You don't have to look any farther. We're also present on, well, LinkedIn just to make announcements, but if you're on Meetup, that's all you need. Another thing you might consider is that we're both the Greater Philadelphia AWS Users Group has a Slack workspace, and the Lehigh Valley AWS Users Group is present there. I also had the privilege a couple of weeks ago to talk to a group of guys who are trying to put together a central Pennsylvania AWS Users Group. Sorry, Mark, that's all the way out in Harrisburg, so we're still the closest. And welcome, and here's Charles Lamb, everybody. Hey. So how are we doing on numbers? We've got 10 so far, and we're 3 minutes in. I'll just take a couple more minutes because, as I say, it's a sort of a tradition with our group for people to come late. But I just want to promote that Slack workspace. If any of you want to join it, not only will you get announcements about events for both of the groups, you will get access to experienced and aspiring cloud professionals. You can ask your questions. Folks are really very kind and helpful. And also, it's a handy place to ask for topics, meeting topics. We were able, for example, to reach out all the way to Colorado to get Andre, who will tell you all about himself, but to get our expert on AWS certification. So pick a topic, pick a thing you want to talk about, and let us know either through Meetup or through the Slack workspace. Just so glad we've got a great turnout today. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Andre, and just let's have a good meeting. And Andre, I think we'll echo this. We discussed it in our group. It's a very small group. Feel free to interrupt. We'll let this go wherever people want it to go. Andre.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. And definitely true. Feel free to interrupt me if you like. I will have time at the end for Q&A, but if it's a question that can't wait, I'd love to hear it. Let me just set my screen up real quick. So again, Andre Zoot. I work for AWS, and I'm a solution architect. Now, most solution architects you meet at AWS are assigned to a customer or a vertical or something like that, but not me. I'm odd. I'm assigned to the certification exams. So I am kind of one of the voices of technology within the team within AWS that creates and maintains our certification exams. So on a daily basis, I'm geared with making sure that the questions you see on the exams are accurate, relevant, and fair. And it's a pretty fun gig. I really like it, and I'll explain why in just a second. A little history about me, because it is relevant to what I'm talking about. I've spent about 25 years as a Unix systems administrator, and now that's a long time. And it was a cool job. I liked it because I got to do a lot of different things. I got to rack and stack servers. I got to patch OSs. I got to install applications, create automation scripts, all these things, which were a lot of fun. But it felt to me like my career, at least the company I worked for, was kind of flattening out. There were still needs for the jobs. There were still jobs to be had, but there was not the growth that I was kind of hoping for. And so about 8 years ago, I pivoted my career towards cloud and specifically towards AWS. And I'll give you some insights from my journey along that route and how it might pertain to you. The splash screen you see here shows all of our certifications. I'm going to talk about this more a little later, but I just wanted something to show on here rather than just my name. Okay, let me continue on. So, single biggest barrier towards cloud are people. There are a lot of unfilled jobs in the cloud right now. Now, that doesn't mean they will hire anyone. They are looking for people with certain skills, certain experience, but there are a lot of jobs out there. As I pivoted my career to an area that had a few more jobs, there's a reason for that. There's a lot of other people that are doing the same thing, really. And disruption. Now, this is kind of a strange statistic. Half of workers' core skills would be disrupted in 4 years. We're in IT. Our skills are always being disrupted. I told my kids, if I went into a coma for 2 years, I would wake up and be unemployable. I would have to completely retrain. So retraining is part of, I think, what we signed up for when we were in IT. Honestly, I like it. And I think a lot of people in IT feel the same way. So one thought is, you're going to be retraining anyway. You might as well schedule your retraining and focus it a little bit and get a certification out of it, either an AWS certification or even another vendor. But it's a nice way to get a shiny little badge for the training that you'd be doing anyway. People make it happen. A theme that you'll hear a couple of times in this presentation. There are not enough people to do all the work that's out there. And there are companies that have projects that they want to execute on that they cannot because they don't have enough people at this point. So in certification, one of our goals is to try to get more people into those roles. And it's not just technical people. Certification and cloud skills are important to semi-technical and non-technical people as well. A technical recruiter is a lot more useful to their clients if they understand what their technical people are talking about. If they know the difference between an S3 bucket and an EBS file system, that's something that they can then represent when they're talking to the clients, people that are hiring folks. So technical recruiters, project managers, people in the business side of things, people in the finance side of things, a lot of them still have use for having technical skills or having at least the language of AWS. And there's this certification that we offer geared specifically towards those people. So some of the things that you get when you become certified, all of these things I believe are true: faster innovation, faster migrations, increased employee retention. All these things are true. My first exposure to AWS was I stood up an EC2 instance in an Amazon free tier account probably about 6 or 8 years ago, probably about 8 years ago. And I installed a web server on it. And I ran that and I put my, my vacation pictures there and I could share the links with my parents and things like that. And it worked fine. But if someone would come to me and say, hey, Andre, I want to run a database on AWS, how do I do it? My answer would be, well, we stand up an EC2 instance and I'll install a database software and we'll set up backups and maybe set up a disaster recovery site. All of this I would say without knowing that AWS already has a service that does that out of the box, RDS. So, I would have given a correct answer, but I wouldn't have given the best answer. And that's one of the things that certifications will do for people, is because now you're exposed to what's possible. I've seen plenty of people that are experts within their organization on AWS, but their organization might only use 6 or 8 AWS services. They might not even be very aware of what the other services do. And a certification exam gives you a bit of a feeling for a lot more services than you probably normally use. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert on these services, but you at least know that they exist and you kind of know what their main things about them are. And that can be really helpful. IT leaders, 97% say the certified employees added value to the organization. This is one of the reasons that they do, is because they now know more than maybe what the company does today. They can give greater insights to things that the company might need to do tomorrow because they have a greater understanding of all the features within AWS, or at least many of the features. And that also leads to why leaders are reporting overall operational efficiency increase and faster project completion when they use people that have AWS certifications. Security, we consider job zero at AWS. Every one of our certifications talks about security in some shape or form. So if you pass a certification exam, you have had some exposure to security. That helps people to create not only faster projects, but better projects. It's always easier to build security in from the beginning than it is to bolt it on when you're done. Okay, here's this graphic again, showing all of our certification exams. And I'll kind of walk through these in general. So if you look down here where my little laser pointers hits, at the lower middle, that's the cloud practitioner exam. Now you notice it says foundational. Just like when you're building a house, this foundational cert is kind of like a basis. It's like the starting point. For a technical career, it's merely a stepping stone. If you were a solution architect and had cloud practitioner on your resume, it's not that prestigious. But if you're new to taking certifications, if you're new to technology, this might be a good place to start just to kind of get your feet wet. Then the other side of the coin is people that are in either non-technical or semi-technical roles, kind of like the PMs and the technical recruiters I mentioned early. This is a great certification for them because if they pass this, they understand the language of AWS. They understand what the main services do and what they don't do. They'll never configure an S3 bucket, but they understand what an S3 bucket is. That makes them much easier to get along with and to communicate with technical people. So next to that, we have 4 associate level certifications, including a brand new one called Data Engineer Associate. I'll talk about that more in the next slide. Think of associate level certifications as like a mile wide and a foot deep. They go into slight depth over quite a few different topics. So these associate certifications, the expectation is that you have hands-on keyboard to be successful on them. It's not required, but we recommend it. You typically learn better when you're doing things, and associate certifications, they're useful if you have hands-on. Cloud practitioner, there's no requirement that you ever log into the console. So that's associate. Above them, you'll see the professional certs. So if associates are a mile wide and a foot deep, think of the professional certs as 2 miles wide and 2 feet deep. More complexity and more depth on everything. Now, when I was looking at jobs about 5 years ago, already in the field of a solution architect, familiar with AWS, a lot of job. I'm sorry, was there a question? Oh, okay. So a lot of the jobs I was looking at had a requirement that said solution architect associate required, solution architect professional preferred. When I saw job listings that had those requirements and the preferred on it, I knew what I wanted. I wanted to check both of those boxes. Now, that doesn't mean that someone's going to give me a job just because of the certifications. I wouldn't hire someone just based on their certifications. But if you have a hiring manager and they've got a stack of 10 resumes, and 2 of those resumes have really compelling work experience, and 2 of those resumes have really appropriate certifications that fit in well with the job role, those are probably the 4 people I'm going to interview. So what I think is that certifications are a way to get you an interview, and then you could showcase your skills in that interview. So anyway, that's professional and specialty. I'm sorry, that's associate and professional. Then there's also specialty certs. And people have asked me a couple of times, well, which is more difficult? professional, or specialty? And I have to give the horrible answer that everyone hates, and that is it depends. Just depends on your personal skill level and expertise. But I will tell you that professional certs, remember, they're fairly wide, but also relatively deep. Specialty certs, not very wide, but very deep. They go into a much deeper level on a very specific topic. So for instance, advanced networking, you will see questions in there that you wouldn't see in the solution architect professional just because they're so deep into networking. Now you'll see at the top, there's 3 specialty certifications that we're retiring. We do that periodically. We retire some certs and we bring in new ones. There are new ones we're working on all the time. I can't give you details on them, but just know that we are listening to our customers and trying to innovate in areas that are interesting to them. If you have a certification that retires, that certification is still valid. It just means you cannot recertify it after it expires. Okay, and now Data Engineer Associate. Again, this is a new cert, brand new. And I worked on it since its inception to when it was released. And a couple of people have told me, well, is this a hard certification? I've heard it's hard. And first off, I hate the word hard because hard doesn't really tell you much. What might be easy to you might be hard to me. But I will say that it's complicated. It has complex scenarios. If you consider that all associate exams are on a spectrum, right? So all associate exams are in the spectrum. The solution architect is somewhere here in the middle. DEA, or Data Engineer Associate, is going to be on the upper end of the spectrum. It is more complex than some of the other certifications. The reason that it is someone who only has 1 or 2 years as a data engineer usually did not come out of school and go straight into being a data engineer. They were a developer, they were maybe an architect, maybe they were a machine learning scientist, and then they kind of transitioned over to working on more and more data projects, and they became a data engineer. So my point is, even though they haven't been a data engineer for that long, most of them come with a lot of experience from other fields as well. And it's almost a requirement these days that you put a Gen AI something inside your presentation. So I'm wondering if Forrest Gump was talking about Gen A or Gen AI. This does have relevance for this topic, though, because as we know, machine learning is really hot right now. How do you train your models? How do you train your models with machine learning? What do you need to do it? You need data. Lots of data, clean data, precise data, data that doesn't have missing values, data that doesn't have too many outliers. So providing that data fuels machine learning. So it still kind of piggybacks onto the favor of machine learning. So we also have what we call certification paths. These are recommendations, not requirements. There's never a requirement from AWS in how you take our certification exams. You could make Solution Architect Professional the first exam you take. I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend starting either with the associate one and getting it first, and then moving on to professional, or maybe even starting with the cloud practitioner, and then associate, and then professional. But if you want to become a solution architect, this is kind of a good path to take. And then if you want a deep dive, security is always a nice specialty to add on because everyone loves security. There's a QR code down here. I don't know if you want to take a picture of the screen of this or not. You're more than welcome to. I will also, if Rob will let me, I'll distribute this slide deck when I'm done. But this shows about a dozen other recommended paths that we have set up. Again, there's no requirement that you have to follow this path, just our recommendation. So once you pass a certification exam, and let me say, a certification exam is a test. You take the test, and if you pass it, you now hold that certification in an active state for 3 years. After 3 years, if you want to keep it active, you need to recertify. Well, a little before 3 years, you need to certify before it hits that 3-year mark. But as long as you do that, the certification is maintained active. Now, there's a lot of people that recertify, and there's a lot of people that don't recertify. It's up to you, completely your choice. There are a couple things we do to make it a little easier to recertify. For instance, if you have Solution Architect Associate, and then you also have Solution Architect Professional, and they're both active, if you recertify Solution Architect Professional, it will also recertify Solution Architect Associate. And it'll also recertify Cloud Practitioner if you happen to have that one too. So if you have those 3 certs, just recertifying Solution Architect Professional will recert all of them. And the recertification is retaking the exam. There was a time when we did a shorter exam for recertifications, but our feelings are so much changes in 3 years. So much changes that the exam bears little resemblance to perhaps to what it did 3 years ago. Okay, so you've decided you wanted to take an exam. You've maybe come up with a path that you want to do. What do you do for training on it? We have a website called Skill Builder. I've got a slide that I'll talk about that. There's also classroom training available either through us or through some of our partners. Up until COVID, classroom training was a real popular choice. During COVID, all the classrooms were shut down and everyone had to switch over to digital training. Many people never switched back. So I would say digital training is probably more the common way to do things now than classroom training. Certifications themselves are a useful way of studying for the exam. Sometimes you can take one certification to help you take another one. AWS works with education programs, some universities, some community colleges, and some other programs are all available to study for the exams. Again, I mentioned Skill Builder. Skillbuilder.aws is our training site. There's 2 ways it can work. There's a free version with over 600 self-paced courses, basically just digital training. There is also a subscription version that gives you that and then more. It gives you labs. It gives you jam sessions, which are kind of like labs with a different kind of purpose. It gives you gamification of training, and it gives you practice exams. All of those are the subscription version of Skill Builder. So Skill Builder is AWS's training site. I'm not an expert on the third parties training sites, but I know they're very relevant, and I didn't want to mislead you and make you think that AWS was the only place that offered training. There are other training sites as well, and but I'm not an expert on them. So what I would like to do right now is have anyone unmute if they've used one of the third-party training sites and tell us what you think of them. If you like them, if you dislike them, give us your thoughts on it.
2 things, guys. One is the slides. I'll make them available on our Slack channel after this. And again, if you don't have access to it, just send me your email address. We'll get you on there. Second, in answer to Andre's question, I've had a lot of success with A Cloud Guru. They've got a combination of self-paced recorded presentations plus labs. You can go into their sandbox and without any risk to your credit card, except for whatever you paid for the course, you can set up databases and S3 buckets to your heart's content. There are others out there, but that's the way I got my certification.
Awesome. Anyone else?
Yeah, there were 2 third-party resources that I had used. To be honest, I had started with AWS Skill Builder, and that's how I got my Cloud Practitioner certification years ago. For the Solutions Architect Pro certification, I used a combination of Udemy and Adrian Cantrill's course. On Udemy, there's a course from Stefan Marek, I think his name is. Both of those were pretty good, but some of my friends had used a cloud guru, like Robert had mentioned.
Awesome. That's great. Anyone else?
I've used the Tutorials Dojo,
Mm-hmm.
and it's mostly for their practice exams. So I do like how they have a review feature with the practice exam. So like first time going through it, you can just go through the exam and then you can see their responses for if you got it right or wrong, but then it'll kind of have good explanations. So you can kind of like use the test as kind of like to learn what you don't know and to also kind of help you, provide that information. And I thought the questions are pretty good compared to I started with the cloud practitioner just to kind of see what the exam process was like. It's been so long. So I took one of these style of exams, and then and that was pretty easy. And then I did think the associate essay was definitely more difficult, but I thought, in comparing it to the practice exams, I thought it was on par. So
Awesome.
Hey guys, can I jump in again? Will, is that a method for people to get themselves on to Slack?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. So Will hasn't fished me in the past, so he's got a pretty good reputation. So if you look in the meeting group chat, that's a more convenient way perhaps to get into the Slack channel. And I'll get those slides up sometime tomorrow after my brain is rested. You know how it is. Yeah, so that's it.
Sounds good. Did you say when your brain was rested or rusted? I'm not quite sure.
Well, it isn't rested right now, so I couldn't give you a straight answer.
That's fair. Fair.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll continue on. If I can make my thing work. So exam prep. We heard about some third-party sites that can be used. We heard about Skill Builder, which is also an option. There's a publication called the Exam Guide, and this link is to the Exam Guide for Cloud Practitioner. It's a different guide for the other exams, but I feel that the Exam Guide is probably the most important document you can read about it. And the exam guide doesn't help you study. It's kind of like a syllabus almost. It tells you what's going to be on the exam so that you can make sure that whatever studying you use fits in with what's going to be on the exam. So I would recommend if you first decide you want to get a certification, I would download the exam guide for that cert. I'd look through it, and then halfway through your study process, I'd look at the guide again to make sure you're on track. And then after you book your exam and say it's coming up in a week, I would look at the guide again just to see if there's any things that you're missing, any things like, oh, kinesis. I didn't really look at kinesis. I guess I better study that. So that's really helpful. We also published 20 sample questions for each exam. These are similar to the what we heard about earlier, the practice questions. These questions are written in the same way we write our normal questions, but there's only 20 in the sample questions. And so I get it that it might be useful to have a larger number as was described. We also have practice exams in Skill Builder, but I'm not trying to make this a commercial for Skill Builder. It's a great resource, but feel free to use whatever helps you prepare for the exam. Accommodations. If English is not your first language, if you're ESL, you can request an extra 30 minutes added to the clock of your exam. However, you have to do that before you register for the exam. Once you've registered, it's already locked in. So feel free to do that if you need the extra time on the exam. Okay, back to the exam or the exam guide. Another thing that will show you is domains. It'll show you subcategories within these domains, but the domains, it shows you a weight. So if you look at these weight, you see the domain 3 technology is 33% of the exam, significantly more than domain 4. This example is for cloud practitioner. It will look different for each exam. But if I'm trying to decide where to spend my time studying, this will help me know to spend more time in the technology side than billing and pricing. Obviously, billing and pricing is still important, but there are going to be more questions about the technology than there are billing and pricing. So keep that in mind when you're studying. And again, this will be different for each exam. I've heard people say, well, I think I'm ready for the exam. I've studied, I feel pretty good about it. I know the core services, but I don't know everything. And so I'm going to wait. And I think that's a trap because nobody knows everything. I don't, no one at AWS does. No one can be expected to. You don't need to know everything. If you're doing well on your practice exams, if you feel like you've really hit well on the studying, then I would say you're probably ready to take it. Now, I've failed 2 of the exams I've taken with AWS, and that's fine because it's only a failure if I end it there. if I use what I've learned from not passing that exam, focus my study on those areas I was weak on, and take the exam again, then it's not a failure. Then it's just success deferred, just a bump in the road. Another thing I hear people say is they studied for the exam and then a year later, they're ready to take it. Is it safe to do that? My answer is generally no, it's not, because new things have been added to that exam that they have not studied for. So that's another reason that we recommend you study for the exam and you take the exam fairly soon thereafter. Now, services have to be generally available, services and features, for 6 months before we put them on the exam. But if you wait a year, new service will have been percolated into that exam that you might not have studied for. Once you decide to take the exam, you have another choice, and that is where you want to take it. You can take it at an online proctor, or you can take it at a testing center. Now, testing centers are areas in your area run by various companies, and usually in most metro areas there are some nearby. In places that are rural, they might be a little further away, but you always have another choice, and that is to take the test at your home or your office. Any place that has essentially 4 walls and a door, ideally a locking door, you can use for it. The reason I say locking is because while you take the test online proctored, someone's watching your web camera, and if they see someone walk into the room with you, they've got to cancel the exam. If they see you lift up your cell phone and looking at it, they've got to cancel the exam. So, be careful about that. Although it's delightful to have your family walk in on your Zoom calls, it's not so delightful if you're taking a test. Oh, whether they're taken online or the testing center, it's exactly the same test. No difference in it at all. If you choose online proctoring, we recommend you use your personal laptop. I can't use my work laptop because the client that the Pearson VUE wants to load on the laptop tries to turn off every other piece of software running on that laptop, and it won't run if it can't do that. Well, my work laptop has certain applications that I can't turn off. So I can't use my work laptop. I have to use a personal one for it. And most people are in the same boat. Now, at a testing center, they'll usually give you a break if you need to use the bathroom. If you're doing online proctoring, not an option. You've got to stay in that webcam the entire time. General exam strategy. I've heard people that erroneously thought that if they left questions unanswered, that those questions would not be counted. That is incorrect. Don't leave any questions unanswered. It never helps you out. So from that, I would say if you're taking the exam and you only have 5 minutes left and you have 10 questions to go, A, B, C, D, E, or A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, I would just answer those 10 questions with something and then go back and look at them carefully and see if, try to pick the right answer until the clock runs out, but don't leave any questions unanswered. It never helps you. Another thing to keep in mind is back to what I said earlier about no one knows everything. You're going to run into questions so you just don't know the answer to. And that's okay. You don't need to know the answer of every question to pass the exam. So the thing to do is don't let that derail your whole process. If you spend 10 minutes on a question and it just drives you crazy and your stress levels up and you're probably going to get it wrong anyway, you would be better off not spending that 10 minutes on that question. One thing you can do is look at the responses and see if there are any of them that you can just be sure they're not correct, and then eliminate those. And from the ones that are left, make a guess, and then mark it for review and move forward. Now, I say mark it for review. You can do that to any question you want. If you're not certain of it and you think you might have time at the end of the exam to go back and look at that question, you can mark it for review and do that. There's also a comment section on each question. Now, the comments can be comments to me or people in my role. You could say, hey, Andre, I didn't think this question was fair, or it was too vague, or I think there's 2 answers. And we will read those comments. Not necessarily each individual one, but if we get more than one comment talking about the same thing, we will definitely see that and account for it. However, you can also use the comments for something else. You could write notes to yourself. So I've seen people do this where they mark a question for review and then they write a note in the comment field. They say, not A, not B. That's not to me. They're telling themselves A and B are incorrect. So when they come back and review it later, they can look at the comment they wrote to themselves and see that. It's kind of a sneaky way to do it, but it's, I don't care if you use it for that. Use any advantage you can. Okay, so that's comments. So the exams are currently, the questions come in two forms. They're either multiple choice, which means there's one correct answer and three incorrect answers, or they're multiple response, means there's 2 or 3 correct answers, and again, exactly 3 incorrect answers. People tend to dislike the multiple response. They're typically a little harder, but they are there on the exam as well. Some of the questions will have a phrase at the bottom of the scenario. They will say, which solution meets these requirements and has the least latency, or which solution meets these requirements and is the most cost effective. Those words at the very end are probably the most important words of the question. I would read them first, and I would read them before I even read the rest of the scenario, and then I'd read them again before I read the responses. Because what that's probably telling you is that there's more than one response that meets many of the requirements, but only one of those that meets many of the requirements is going to be the least latency or the most cost effective. So keep that really in the forefront of your mind when you're answering the questions. Okay. That's the big thing of what I wanted to present. And I would love to have a quick Q&A session after this, but I will also put in an appeal. Please fill out this survey. It takes about 3 to 5 minutes. It's a standardized survey, so it asks a few questions that really aren't terribly relevant, but I'd love to know areas that I did well. I'd love to know areas I can improve on. And I also, any questions you have about certification, I know, I'm not trying to brag, but I know quite a bit about that because I've worked in that group for over 4 years. So anything that I can answer, I would be happy to now.
So I have a question. When I was prepping for the practitioner exam, I read that there was 15 out of the 65 questions that were not graded. And they're kind of like test questions.
Yeah.
And I experienced a couple of those, and they actually threw me for a loop because I remember one question was about M1 Mac instances, setting those up. And I was like, did not prepare for that at all. And it kind of really threw me off. The rest of the exam was fine, but there was just a few questions that were like really felt either advanced or just out of place. And I know, and is that also the same? Because when I took the essay exam, I didn't really feel the same. Was that just with the practitioner?
No, that's true for all of our exams. So the reason for those is we have, if you take an exam that has 65 questions, 50 of them you're graded on, 15 of them you're not graded on. We don't tell you which are which because you might just skip the ones that are not affecting your score. The reason we do that is we're collecting statistics on how everyone does on these questions. And, we're always feeding new questions into the exam over time and dropping questions out of the exam over time. And we need to try the questions out first. If we find a question and we find, everyone's getting it right, we don't put it on. We're not going to ever score you on that question. If we find that no one's getting it right, then there might be a flaw in the question and we pull it out and don't score you on it. So even though you see a question on the exam, you don't really know if that's a scored question or not. Now, another reason that we do the scoring like that is because different questions have different levels of difficulty, right? There might be, you might take a form, you might get a set of questions that are slightly more difficult than mine. If you do, your cut score needs to be slightly lower than mine. And we've got a group of people called psychometricians who are statisticians and mostly PhDs, really smart people that help us equate these. And we do this so that the exam is always fair, even when we're moving questions on and moving questions off, that the exam you take is just as fair as the one I take. That was a long explanation, but I think it's a really fascinating topic, so I love talking about it.
Samaya, did you have a question?
Say
one of the items was to go over quickly about data engineering associate exam. Did we go over?
So the question, Andre, is specifically about the data engineering associate exam.
Yes.
So we did go, that was before you came in.
Oh, sorry.
But was that one, that's a new exam. Is that associate's level though?
It is. It's a
Okay,
new
yeah.
associate exam. And it just went generally available. It was previously available as a beta exam only. And a beta exam means there's extra questions to take. It's half price, and you don't know right away whether you passed or not. But it's no longer in beta. It is now generally available. So you get your notification, pretty quickly as whether you passed or didn't.
What exactly is covered in the preparation for this test? Or what kind of domains or topics or technologies or the services, the AWS services that mostly involved in this certification?
You're asking, how do you prep for the exam?
Yeah, for data engineering, I believe this is about like machine learning, like SageMaker, etc. Well, I was wondering what are the main AWS services that will be tested as part of this
So
certification.
Sure. So the exam guide is probably the best way to find these,
Okay.
and I can put that link into this slide before I send it out. But I'll tell you that SageMaker is usually not a major component of the data engineering exam. The data engineering exam is about taking data from a source, doing a transform on it, and then making it available to something else. So this could be using certain, if you look at the exam guide, you'll see services like Glue mentioned a lot. You'll see Data Wrangler mentioned a lot. You'll see pipelines mentioned. You'll see services like EMR and Lambda and Kinesis. Those will all be mentioned in the exam guide. Are you planning on taking it?
Not sure yet, but yeah,
Well,
not decided yet. But it sounds.
okay. And
It sounds interesting to the things that the companies are looking for right now. Data engineering has been the hot topic, right, around the industry.
data
So
engineering, I would say data engineering and machine learning are both pretty hot right now. And again, you can't really do machine learning without data engineers. So the two kind of are linked hand in hand. There's, I would recommend taking a look at Skill Builder too. There's some good courses on Skill Builder that will help prepare you for it. And then, if you want to use one of the other third-party vendors, the training sites, those already have courses for data engineering as well.
thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'll stay as long as anyone has. And if you want to wait, if you have one that you just don't want to speak in front of the group, I'm happy to hold on this call as long as there's one person also on the call with me.
Well, I just gotta say that early in my journey, so I was around 2019, I took the Associates Solutions Architect Associates.
Nice.
And that was fabulous because what it did for me is after that point, after studying and taking the exam, I could listen in on just about any kind of AWS discussion and actually know what they were talking about. Didn't make me an expert, didn't mean that I could go out and, write up a full amp stack in a database and all the rest of it. But it's just a great way to get a foundation in it. The other quick thing is that I love that marking the questions on the exam, because I could go through the exam and, oh, that's an easy one, click and move on. Oh, that one, that's a little bit hard, I'll just mark it to come back. Went through the whole thing, got all the things that I perceived were easy, and then started over again. Just a really good thing to give you confidence.
Nice. Glad to hear you using that feature. And I agree. If someone says, what exam should I take? What we usually recommend is you take certifications that, at least what I recommend, that first document where you are. If you're already a solution architect, it makes sense to take the solution architect associate. And then what I recommend people do is, where are you going in three years? And work on a certification that points you in that direction. Now, you don't always get to choose what projects you work on at work. If there is a machine learning project coming up at work and you would like to be selected for it, you don't necessarily get to do that, but you always get to select what you're studying on your own time. And it's really compelling to a hiring manager if they're staffing up their machine learning project. And by the way, on your free time, you've gone out and taken and passed the machine learning specialty exam. I mean, that sounds pretty good. So use the certifications to go where you want to go that you might not be able to get opportunity to explore at work.
So from your experience, how long is the ideal duration for the test preparation? Like a month, 2 months, 3 months? I know it differs from person to person depending on how much time they spend on the preparation, but in general.
The foundational exam, cloud practitioner, people typically don't have to study terribly long for that one, especially if they're already technical. An associate exam, a month sounds about right, again, depending on how much you go into it. And for a professional or specialty, I would say probably 2 months. Again, it largely depends on how much time you put into it and where you're starting from. Another technique I use is I will register for the exam and use the impending date of that as kind of a wake-up call to finish off any studying I have to do. There's more incentive when you know that that clock is ticking down. And you can't always push it back. I think you have to do it either 24 or 48 hours ahead of time. I'm not sure. But if you've got the exam scheduled and you just have been so busy at work, you haven't had time to complete your studying, push it back another week or two. Don't take it if you haven't been able to get that last minute studying in.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any non-certification questions? We've got a lot of AWS experience in this room, so.
Before we go there, Andre, I'm going to make one recommendation for the presentation.
Yes, sir.
I think it would be great to have 3 slides that show example questions from cloud practitioner, associate,
Nice.
and professional.
Yeah, that's a good idea. If you don't mind leaving that in the survey, I'd appreciate it, but I'll definitely add that to it. That's a good idea.
Just to give people a sense of what is involved at the 3 different levels.
Right.
And my last thing is a tip for anyone taking the SA Pro. 1 gigabit per second equals 11 terabytes per day. And it is, if you know that, it's surprising how many questions you will answer.
For the network exam too, you might find that useful.
Keith, would you slide your beer in front of the camera? I just want to encourage people to come to Two Rivers Brewing where we have our meetings. You're always welcome online, but when the weather's better, and if you can make it out from Ohio, Sri, that'd be great. You're always welcome.
I wish I could drink. I don't drink, but I might change my mind after seeing this.
They got
There's
water,
water too.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I'm ever around that part of the country, I'll definitely visit.
Oh, marvelous.
And the food's pretty good as well.
Yeah, pretty good food. Yeah, they don't charge us for this room, so I encourage people to, get something to eat and tip them well. Say again? Okay.
Sorry, there's some background noise.
Oh, okay. Well, as I mentioned earlier, Reinforce is in Philadelphia on June 10th, 11th, 12th. Reinforce will cost you $1,100. No, yeah,
Yeah.
$1,100 to get in. Or you could just go to the party that the Greater AWS Users Group and the Lehigh Valley Users Group is having on Tuesday, the 11th at around 4:30, 5 o'clock. The details will be on meetup.com. Also tomorrow I'll get the slides, and I usually do a little post-game commentary, and I'll put that in our Slack channel, and in I think do I put it in Meetup? I think yeah, the brain's not working, sorry, in our LinkedIn channel, but I'll make sure you guys get the slides. And I know where to find Andre, so I can hunt him down and get him.
Feel free.
Great.
And if I could do a plug,
Please.
the next Greater Philly AWS meetup is on April 18th. The topic is Amazon Q and I believe Bedrock with an AWS SA presenting. It will be in Exton, Pennsylvania, which is west of Philadelphia.
Is that also a hybrid thing, or do you have to go to Exton?
We'll try and make it non-hybrid, or we'll try and make it hybrid.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the past, it's been easier for us to do just in person. We're getting used to kind of running the group.
It's been a recent leadership change over there, but I'm sure they'll get the hang of it. I see Mark has put some interesting stuff in there. Mark, could you tell us about that? What is that?
Well, I don't know if anybody else listens to the AWS Developer Podcast. It's pretty good, and they just released 6 episodes, a series of just kind of talking about the certifications and how to prepare for them. So I think it's pretty informative.
Nice.
That's great. Thank you.
It actually reminds me of a similar series on Twitch called AWS Power Hour.
I was on that for a couple episodes years ago.
I mean, it's a different format. If you want to learn about the certifications through a podcast or through like short TV shows, it was entertaining.
Well, if you're not especially fast with the pen, know that we're recording this, and so this will be a link certainly in the Slack channel. We'll get that there. Get me to the end of tomorrow, because I got a big morning meeting tomorrow. We'll have our jobs.
Okay, well, I'll get those over to you tonight and give you as much time as you like to do that tomorrow then.
Fabulous, thank you.
And a quick question, it's not related to exam preparation or exam, but is there a course, is there AWS course that will talk about different architectures that industry is using for their problems or for their use cases? How different AWS services are used efficiently in a cost optimization way to solve their test cases or use cases.
And I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you terribly well.
So it's basically about like design patterns or reference architectures, how different companies are using different AWS services in their products, right?
I mean, every company is different. Some are all in on AWS, but I would say more companies are hybrid. They're using some AWS services and some other vendor services, maybe some SaaS services like, Snowflake or Databricks or Hootie file systems. There's a lot of really great things out there. And usually the bigger companies choose the things they like best from each vendor and put those together.
I can say that in our group, we've approached those kinds of questions two ways. One is every now and again, we'll have a presentation on the well-architected framework. So you're familiar with this. We had some great presenters with lots of examples. We've done a lot of work for different businesses. The second way is that, and these are our most popular meetings, if we can get somebody who's done an interesting project. And they'll just present on how that went. It can be something simple like Snowball. It could be something a little more complicated, like we had Eckerd College talk about how they got their ERP systems into the cloud. We've had another one from Lafayette where our identity and access management guy talked about how we brought that from on-campus servers to AWS services. So, you know, that's, if we can get suggestions in the Slack channels, if anybody here has done a project, whether small or large, give us a presentation. We're very supportive, and you know, we'll get you all prepared to do your presentation at the next AWS Summit.
Speaking of which, the videos from reInvent are worth looking through.
Yeah.
And going to the summit, I always try and just schedule the actual company talks of how they applied AWS.
Yeah, I watched a couple of videos. There are architecture videos where people talk about how they use different AWS services in their company to solve a particular problem. It could be a finance company or it could be whatever it is. Right? So I think there is a site, AWS site, where they post the architecture videos. They, maybe during summits they talk to different people and they talk about the architecture of the overall system, how different AWS components are used in the system. And the interviewer asks questions, why you are using this and what advantage it is bringing to you using this service in your architecture. So things like that.
If you see a video that looks interesting to you, send it along to the Slack channel. You'd be surprised. I can probably get that person or one of their colleagues to give that at a group meeting here.
Sure.
And then you can ask Biff or Sally or whoever it is, you know, directly. It's our superpower. It really is. We can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, with so many AWS services around, it's always tricky to choose the right one for the right situation, for the right scenario. I think maybe that's where solution architecture certification will help doing that, picking the right service.
Yeah.